The royal palace of Seraph Prime stretched across the horizon like a jewel carved from living crystal. Its towers caught the light of 3 distant suns and scattered rainbows across the gardens below. This was the heart of the Valanthy Empire, home to a species that had ruled 100 star systems for 10,000 years. Princess Lyrovan stood on her balcony and watched the sunrise. Her silver skin glowed softly in the morning light, and her 4 eyes, too large and too small, tracked the movement of servants in the courtyard below. She was beautiful by any standard in the galaxy. Tall, graceful, with the natural telepathic abilities that made her people so formidable in politics and war. Behind her, she heard the soft sound of someone moving in their shared chambers. "You're awake early," said a quiet voice. Lyrovan turned to see her husband standing in the doorway. Danny Cole was human average height, brown hair, gentle brown eyes. He wore simple clothes and held a cup of tea in his hands. He smiled at her the way he always did, warm and patient. "I could not sleep," she said. "There is much on my mind." Danny walked to stand beside her. He was so small compared to her. The top of his head barely reached her shoulder. When they walked together through the palace, people stared. They always stared. 2 years ago, their marriage had been arranged as part of a diplomatic agreement between the Valanthy Empire and Earth's coalition. Humanity was new to the galactic stage, having discovered faster than light travel only 50 years before. They were not powerful. They had no telepathy, no natural weapons, no special abilities that anyone could see. But they were numerous, and they learned quickly. And the Valanthy Emperor had decided that friendship was better than conflict, so Lyrovan had married Danny Cole. A cultural liaison from Earth. She did not hate him. In truth, she had grown fond of him over the 2 years they had spent together. He was kind. He listened when she spoke. He never demanded anything from her. He spent his days reading books in the palace library, or tending to the plants in the royal conservatory, or simply sitting quietly while she worked on matters of state. But she did not respect him. Not truly. How could she? He was so ordinary. The Valanthy were warriors. Even their scholars trained in combat. Even their artists could kill with their minds if needed. Lyrovan herself had fought in 3 border conflicts before her 20th year. She'd have killed enemies with her bare hands, and with her telepathic abilities. Danny had never fought anyone. He seemed afraid of loud noises. He apologized constantly, even when he had done nothing wrong. When servants were rude to him, he simply smiled and walked away. He was soft, weak, helpless. Lyrovan protected him because she felt it was her duty. He was her husband, after all. But she often wondered what her ancestors would think if they could see her now, warrior princess married to a man who spent his mornings growing flowers. "What troubles you?" Danny asked, sipping his tea. "Politics," she said. "There are always politics. Anything I can help with?" She almost laughed. What could he possibly help with? He had no understanding of Valanthy court intrigue. He had no telepathy to read the lies behind the smiles. He was just Danny. Sweet, simple Danny. "No," she said, not unkindly. "But thank you for offering." He nodded and looked out at the sunrise. "It's beautiful here," he said. "I never get tired of this view." Lyrovan studied him for a moment. She had tried many times to understand what went on inside his head. But humans were difficult to read, even for telepaths. Their minds were chaotic and strange, full of emotions that seemed to contradict each other. Danny's mind was especially quiet. When she tried to sense his thoughts, she found only stillness, like the surface of a pond on a windless day. Her advisors said this was because humans were simple creatures. They did not have complex inner lives like the Valanthy. They were barely more than animals, really, dressed up in clothes and taught to speak. Lyrovan was not sure she believed this, but she had no evidence to the contrary. Later that morning, She attended a council meeting with her father, Emperor Kelver. The council chamber was vast, filled with nobles and advisors from across the empire. Danny was not invited. He never was. The Crocian Dominion has requested a diplomatic meeting, announced Lord Verith, the Emperor's chief advisor. He was old and scarred, a veteran of countless wars. They will send a delegation led by Warlord Thrax himself. A murmur went through the chamber. The Crocian were feared throughout the galaxy. They were massive creatures, 8 feet tall, with armored exoskeletons and 4 powerful arms. They had conquered dozens of species and shown mercy to none. For years, they had been pushing against Volanti borders, testing defenses, looking for weakness. What do they want? Asked the Emperor. They claim they want peace, Lord Verith said. But I suspect they want to study us, to find our weaknesses before they attack. Then we will show them no weakness, the Emperor declared. We will welcome them as honored guests and prove that the Volanthi are not afraid. Lyrovan felt a chill run down her spine. The Crocian were dangerous. If they decided to attack, the war would be devastating for both sides. She hoped her father knew what he was doing. After the meeting, she found Danny in the conservatory. He was on his knees in the dirt, carefully planting seeds in a row of ceramic pots. His hands were covered in soil, and there was a smudge of dirt on his cheek. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "How was the meeting?" he asked. "Troubling," she admitted. "The Crocian are coming." Danny's hands paused for just a moment. Then he continued planting. "I've heard of them," he said. "They don't sound friendly." "They are not. They are monsters. Then I'll make sure to stay out of their way." Lyrovan looked at him, this small, quiet man covered in dirt, and felt a strange mix of affection and frustration. She wished he was stronger. She wished he could stand beside her as an equal. But he was what he was, and she had accepted that long ago. "Yes," she said. "That would be best. I will protect you if anything happens." Danny looked up at her, and for just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Something she could not identify. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual gentle smile. "I know you will," he said. "Thank you, Lyral." She left him to his gardening, unaware that everything she believed about her husband was about to be proven wrong. The Crocian ships arrived 3 days later. They descended from the sky like metal beasts, black and angular, designed for war rather than beauty. The largest ship landed in the palace courtyard, crushing the carefully maintained gardens beneath its weight. Lyral stood with her father and the royal court to welcome the delegation. She wore her ceremonial armor, like silver plates that covered her vital organs, and carried a blade at her hip. Around her, the palace guards stood at attention, their faces hard, and their hands ready. Danny stood behind her, dressed in simple formal clothes. He had asked if he should attend, and she had hesitated before saying yes. It would look strange if the princess's husband was absent. But she worried about what the Crocian might do when they saw him. The ship's door opened with a hiss of steam. Heavy footsteps echoed across the courtyard. Warlord Thrax emerged first. He was enormous, nearly 9 feet tall, with dark red armor plating that covered his body like the shell of some ancient insect. 4 massive arms hung at his sides, each one ending in clawed hands that could tear through steel. His face was a nightmare of sharp angles and small black eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Behind him came 20 warriors, each one nearly as large and twice as ugly. Emperor Kelver stepped forward. "Welcome to Sereth Prime, Warlord Thrax. We are honored by your visit." Thrax made a sound that might have been laughter. "Honored," he repeated, his voice like gravel scraping against metal. "Yes, I am sure you are." He walked past the Emperor without bowing, without showing any sign of respect. His black eyes scanned the assembled court, taking note of every detail. When his gaze fell on Lyrovan, he paused. "The famous warrior princess," he said. "I have heard stories about you. They say you killed 50 enemies in the Battle of Varath's Moon." 63. Lyrelvan corrected, keeping her voice steady. Thrax smiled, revealing rows of sharp black teeth. "Good. I like warriors." His eyes moved past her and found Danny. The smile faded, replaced by something like disgust. "And what is this?" Lyrelvan felt her stomach tighten. "This is my husband, Danny Cole of Earth." Thrax walked toward Danny. Each step made the ground shake. The Crocian warriors behind him laughed, a harsh and ugly sound. Danny did not move. He stood perfectly still, his hands clasped in front of him, his expression calm. Thrax stopped directly in front of him and looked down. The warlord was so tall that Danny had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. "A human," Thrax said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I have heard about humans. Soft little creatures from a soft little world. No claws, no armor, no telepathy. You are prey animals who learn to build ships." He leaned closer. Why would a warrior princess marry prey? The court was silent. Lyrelvan felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced it down. Starting a fight now would only make things worse. Danny spoke for the first time. "It is nice to meet you, Warlord Thrax. I hope your journey was comfortable." "I hope your journey was comfortable." More laughter from the Crocian. Thrax tilted his head, studying Danny like a scientist examining an insect. "It speaks," he said, "and it is polite. How charming." He reached out with one massive claw and poked Danny in the chest. "Tell me, little human, do you hide behind your wife when danger comes? Do you cry and beg for protection?" Danny did not flinch. "I prefer to avoid danger when possible," he said. "Fighting seems like a lot of trouble." Thrax laughed again, louder this time. "Avoid danger? Yes, that is what prey does. That is what cowards do." He turned to address the court. "This is what the Volanthi have become. They marry cowards and call it diplomacy. Pathetic." Lyrelvan's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to strike him. She wanted to show him what Volanthi warriors could do. But her father placed a hand on her arm, silently telling her to wait. The welcoming ceremony continued, though the tension never faded. Thrax insulted the food, the palace, the guards, and anything else he could think of. He was testing them, Lyrelvan realized, pushing to see how far he could go before they pushed back. That night, she found Danny in their chambers. He was sitting by the window, looking out at the stars. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I'm fine," he said. The things he said were just words. Danny turned to look at her. His expression was as calm as ever. "Words don't hurt me, Laurel. They never have." She sat down beside him. "I wanted to kill him. When he touched you, when he called you a coward, I wanted to tear his throat out." "I know," Danny said. "I saw it in your eyes. Thank you for controlling yourself. It would have started a war." She stared at him. How could he be so calm? How could anyone insult him so badly and provoke no reaction at all? "Does nothing make you angry?" she asked. Danny was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Only actions matter, Laurel. What people say means nothing. It is what they do that reveals who they truly are." She did not fully understand what he meant. But before she could ask more questions, a servant entered with an urgent message. Lord Verith wanted to see her, alone. Immediately, she found the old advisor in his private chambers. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking. "What is wrong?" she demanded. "I have discovered something terrible," Verith said. "One of your father's most trusted advisors, Lord Malthan, has been communicating secretly with the Crocian for months. He has promised to help them take the palace. In exchange, they will make him the new emperor. Lyrylvan felt the blood drain from her face. A coup? Yes, and I believe it will happen soon. Perhaps tonight. Vareth grabbed her arm. We must warn your father. We must. A blade appeared in his chest. Vareth looked down at it, confused, and then collapsed. Behind him stood Lord Malthan, his face twisted with cold satisfaction. I am sorry, Princess, he said, but you will not be warning anyone. Before Lyrylvan could react, Crocian warriors burst through the door. She killed 2 of them with her blade and a 3rd with her mind. But there were too many. A heavy blow struck the side of her head, and the world dissolved into darkness. When she woke, she was lying in a corridor. Blood soaked her side from a wound she did not remember receiving. The palace was filled with screams and the sounds of fighting. The coup had begun, and somewhere in the chaos, her husband was alone. Lyrylvan pressed her hand against the wound in her side and forced herself to stand. The corridor was dark, lit only by the flickering emergency lights that meant the main power had been cut. Somewhere in the distance, she heard explosions and the clash of metal against metal. She had to find her father. She had to stop this. Moving carefully through the shadows, she made her way toward the throne room. Bodies lay scattered across the floor, servants, guards, nobles who had tried to resist. The Crocian had shown no mercy. They never did. She passed the entrance to the conservatory and paused. The door was open. Inside, she could see the plants that Danny had spent months caring for. Flowers from a dozen different worlds, arranged with such gentle attention. The sight made her heart ache. Where was he? Was he hiding somewhere? Was he already dead? She pushed the thought away. She could not worry about Danny now. Her father needed her. 3 Crocian warriors appeared at the end of the corridor. They saw her immediately and charged, their massive bodies shaking the floor with each step. Lyrylvan raised her blade and reached out with her mind, searching for weaknesses in their thoughts. The first one fell when she pushed a telepathic command into his brain, making his muscles freeze for just a moment. Her blade found his throat before he could recover. The second one was stronger. He blocked her mental attack and swung all 4 of his arms at once. She ducked, rolled, and came up behind him. Her blade cut through the gap between his armor plates. The third one hit her before she could turn. His fist slammed into her injured side, and she screamed as fresh blood poured from the wound. She fell against the wall, gasping for breath, and watched him raise his claws for the killing blow. A hand grabbed her arm and pulled her through a doorway. She found herself in a small storage room. The door closed behind her, and she looked up to see Danny standing over her. His face was calm, but his eyes were different somehow. Harder, more focused. You're hurt, he said. It's nothing, she gasped, though they both knew she was lying. You need to hide. Find somewhere safe. The Crocian are killing everyone. Danny knelt beside her and examined her wound. His hands were steady as he tore a strip from his shirt and pressed it against her side. This will slow the bleeding, he said. But you need a doctor. There are no doctors, she said. Everyone is dead or fighting. Danny, please, you have to run. Find a shuttle, escape from the palace. I cannot protect you right now. He looked at her for a long moment. Something changed in his expression. The gentle, soft-spoken man she had known for 2 years seemed to fade away, replaced by something else entirely. Where is your father? He asked. The throne room, I think. The Crocian will have taken him there. They will want to make an example of him before they kill him. Danny nodded slowly. Then he stood up. What are you doing? Lyrylvan asked. I'm going to get him. She stared at him. That's impossible. There are dozens of Crocian warriors between here and the throne room. Warlord Thrax himself is probably there. You can't fight them. She stopped herself. I'm what? Danny asked quietly. A coward? A weakling? Prey? I didn't mean. You did. There was no anger in his voice, only a strange, calm certainty. You've thought it since the day we met. Everyone has. And that's fine. I wanted you to think that. I wanted everyone to think that. He walked to the door and paused with his hand on the handle. The storage room was connected to a maintenance corridor, a back route that servants used to move through the palace unseen. Danny, Lyrovan said, what are you talking about? He turned back to look at her, and for the first time, she truly saw him. Not the mask he had worn for 2 years, not the gentle gardener or the quiet husband. She saw the man beneath. His posture had changed. The slight hunch was gone, replaced by perfect balance, the kind that came from years of training. His hands hung loosely at his sides, but there was something dangerous in the way his fingers curled. And his eyes, his soft brown eyes, had become cold and empty, like windows into a void. Stay here, he said. Don't move until I come back for you. You'll die, she whispered. Danny smiled. It was not the warm, gentle smile she knew. This smile was thin and sharp, like the edge of a blade. No, he said. I won't. He opened the door and stepped into the corridor. Lyrovan tried to stand, tried to follow him, but her wounds screamed in protest, and she fell back against the wall. Through the door, she heard footsteps. Then voices, Crocian voices, harsh and mocking. Look, a little human, all alone. Where are you going, pray? Come, let us play with you. There was a moment of silence. Then a sound she had never heard before, a wet, tearing noise, followed by a heavy thud. Then another, and another. The voices stopped. The footsteps stopped. Everything stopped. Lyrovan heard Danny's footsteps continuing down the corridor, steady and unhurried. Then they faded into the distance, and she was left alone with the silence and the growing pool of her own blood. She did not know how long she lay there. It felt like hours. The sounds of fighting grew distant as the battle moved toward the throne room. She drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by the image of Danny's cold eyes and thin smile. Who was he? What was he? What had she married? Eventually, she heard footsteps approaching. She reached for her blade, ready to fight, ready to die. The door opened. A Volanthi medic rushed in, followed by 2 palace guards. Princess, thank the stars you're alive. The throne room, she gasped. My father, the Emperor is safe, the medic said as he began treating her wound. The coup has failed. The Crocian are retreating. How? There were so many of them. The medic exchanged a look with the guards. When he spoke again, his voice was filled with something that sounded almost like fear. Your husband, he said. The human. The medic swallowed hard. Princess, what is he? Lyrovan closed her eyes. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know. The throne room of Sarath Prime was built to inspire awe. Its ceiling rose 300 feet above the floor, supported by columns carved from single pieces of crystal. The throne itself sat on a raised platform, gleaming with gold and precious stones. Tonight, the throne room was filled with blood. Warlord Thrax stood before the throne, his forearms crossed over his massive chest. Around him, 30 of his best warriors formed a protective circle. On the floor at his feet, Emperor Calver knelt with his hands bound behind his back. Blood ran down the Emperor's face from a cut above his eye. You should have accepted our offer, Thrax said. We gave you a chance to surrender peacefully. Now your people will suffer. Calver looked up at him with defiance in his 4 eyes. The Volanthi do not surrender. We never have. We never will. Thrax made that grinding sound that passed for laughter among his kind. Brave words from a man on his knees. Soon you will beg. They all beg, in the end. Lord Malvin stood nearby, watching with satisfaction. The traitor had already planned his coronation. He would be a puppet emperor, of course, answering to the Crocian in all things. But he did not care. Power was power. Kill him, Malthus said. Kill him and be done with it. I want to sit on that throne before sunrise. Thrax turned to look at the traitor. You do not give me orders, little Volanthe. Remember your place. Before Malthus could respond, the doors to the throne room exploded inward. No, not exploded. They simply opened, slamming against the walls with enough force to crack the ancient crystal. Standing in the doorway was a single figure, silhouetted against the emergency lights of the corridor behind him. Danny Cole walked into the throne room. His clothes were torn and stained with blood, none of it his own. In his right hand, he carried a blade taken from a fallen guard. His face was calm, almost peaceful, but his eyes were the eyes of something that had stopped pretending to be human. Behind him, in the corridor, Thrax could see the bodies. 8 of his warriors lay scattered across the floor, killed so quickly and efficiently that they had not even had time to scream. For the first time in many years, Warlord Thrax felt a small flicker of uncertainty. The human pet, he said, forcing amusement into his voice. Have you come to die beside your father-in-law? How touching. Danny said nothing. He simply walked forward, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. Thrax gestured to 3 of his warriors. Kill him. The 3 Crocian charged. They were among the deadliest soldiers in the galaxy, veterans of 100 battles, trained from birth to kill. Each one was 3 times Danny's size and 10 times his strength. The first one swung all 4 arms in a coordinated attack that should have torn Danny in half. But Danny was not there. He had moved not away from the attack, but into it, slipping between the massive arms like water through cracks in stone. His blade flashed once, finding the gap between the warrior's helmet and chestplate. The Crocian fell without a sound. The second one was smarter. He tried to grab Danny, to use his superior reach and strength to crush the human before he could strike. But Danny moved like something that did not obey normal rules of physics. He dropped low, rolled between the warrior's legs, and came up behind him. The blade entered the base of the skull, severing the spine. The third one managed to land a blow, a glancing hit that sent Danny sliding across the floor. Any normal human would have been killed instantly. Danny simply rolled with the impact, came to his feet, and threw the blade. It spun through the air and buried itself in the warrior's eye. 3 seconds. 3 Crocian warriors, all dead. The throne room was silent. Danny walked to the third body and pulled his blade free. He wiped it clean on the dead warrior's armor, then looked up at Thrax. Who are you? Thrax demanded. What are you? Danny tilted his head slightly. I'm just a gardener, he said. I grow flowers. I read books. I like quiet mornings and good tea. He paused. But before that, I was something else. Something I tried very hard to forget. He began walking toward the throne again. Earth has a saying, Danny continued. Beware the quiet ones. Beware the ones who smile when they should be afraid. Beware the ones who never raise their voice, because when they finally speak, it is usually the last thing their enemies ever hear. Thrax snarled and drew his own blade, a massive ceremonial weapon designed to cut through battle armor. I am Warlord Thrax. I have conquered 20 worlds. I have killed thousands. I know, Danny said. I've read your file. He attacked. The fight that followed would become legend throughout the galaxy. Warlord Thrax, the most feared warrior of the Crocian Dominion, against a single human with a stolen sword. It should have been over in seconds, but Danny did not fight like a human. He did not fight like a Volanthe or a Crocian or any species that Thrax had ever encountered. He fought like mathematics, every movement precise, every attack calculated, every defense positioned exactly where it needed to be. Thrax was stronger. Thrax was faster. Thrax had 4 arms and armor that could stop plasma bolts. None of it mattered. Danny read patterns. He predicted movements before they happened. He exploited weaknesses that Thrax did not know he had. Every time Thrax attacked, Danny was somewhere else. Every time Thrax defended, Danny found an opening. Cuts began appearing on Thrax's body. Small at first, a slice across the arm, a gash on the leg. But they added up. The warlord was bleeding from a dozen wounds, and the humans still had not taken a single hit. "What are you?" Thrax screamed. Danny did not answer. He simply kept coming. The end came when Thrax made a desperate overhead swing with all 4 arms. Danny stepped inside the attack, so close that their bodies almost touched. His blade came up in a single perfect thrust, entering beneath Thrax's chin and piercing his brain. The warlord's eyes went wide. His body went rigid. Then he collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. Danny stood over the body, breathing hard but otherwise unharmed. He looked at the remaining Crocian warriors, who stared at him with something that looked very much like terror. "Leave," Danny said. His voice was quiet but carried through the entire chamber. "Go back to your ships. Go back to your dominion. Tell your leaders what happened here. Tell them that if they ever threaten this empire again, if they ever threaten my wife again, I will come for them. And I will not stop until every single one of them is dead." He paused. "Or don't leave. Stay and fight. I have nowhere else to be tonight." The Crocian ran. All of them. Even the ones who had never retreated in their entire lives. They ran like prey, fleeing from a predator, and they did not stop until they reached their ships. Danny watched them go. Then he walked to the Emperor and cut his bonds. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice soft again. "Are you hurt?" Kelver stared at him. "You. Who are you?" Danny smiled, not the thin, dangerous smile from before, but something warmer, sadder. "I'm your daughter's husband," he said. "That's all I ever wanted to be." 3 days had passed since the Night of Blood. The palace was still being repaired, walls rebuilt, floors cleaned, bodies buried. Lord Malthon had been captured trying to escape, and now awaited trial for treason. The Crocian Dominion had sent a formal apology and withdrawn all forces from Volanti space. They were afraid. Everyone was afraid. Lyrovan walked through the corridors of her home, her wound bandaged but healing. She passed servants who stopped and stared. She passed nobles who whispered behind their hands. She passed guards who stood a little straighter when they saw her, their eyes filled with questions they dared not ask. Everyone wanted to know about her husband. Everyone wanted to know what he was. She found him where she knew he would be, in the conservatory, kneeling in the dirt, planting seeds. He looked up when she entered and smiled. It was his old smile, warm and gentle, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. "The doctors say you should be resting," he said. "I needed to see you." Danny nodded and set down his gardening tools. He stood up and wiped his hands on his pants, leaving streaks of dirt on the fabric. He looked so ordinary, so harmless. Even now, knowing what she knew, Lyrovan found it hard to connect this quiet man with the warrior who had killed Warlord Thrax. "You have questions," Danny said. It was not a question. "Yes." "Then ask." She took a deep breath. "Who are you, really?" Danny was silent for a long moment. He turned and looked out the window at the gardens beyond. The gardens he had spent 2 years nurturing with patient care. "I was born on Earth," he said finally, "in a small town called Cedar Falls. My parents were teachers. I had a normal childhood." He paused. "When I was 18, I joined the military. I was good at it. Too good. I was selected for a program called Black Division. Lyrovan had never heard of it. Black Division is classified at the highest level, Danny continued. Only a handful of people in the entire coalition know it exists. We were trained to be weapons to fight species that were bigger, faster, stronger than us. To kill things that should have been impossible to kill. You were an assassin. I was whatever Earth needed me to be. For 15 years, I did things that I will never speak of. I killed people who deserved to die. I killed people who did not deserve to die. I became very, very good at destroying things. His voice was flat, empty. And then one day, I woke up and realized that I had become something I hated. A monster wearing human skin. He turned to face her. His eyes were sadder than she had ever seen them. I retired. I requested assignment to the most peaceful posting. I could find a diplomatic liaison position on a planet far from any conflict. When your father offered the marriage alliance, I volunteered. Not for politics, not for duty. I volunteered because I wanted to be someone else, someone ordinary, someone who grew flowers instead of harvesting lives. Lyrovan felt tears forming in her eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Because you never asked. Danny stepped closer to her. From the moment we met, you had already decided who I was. The weak human, the helpless husband, the prey creature who needed protection. And I was happy to let you believe it. Because when you looked at me, you saw a man, not a monster, not a weapon, just Danny, the gardener, the reader of books, the man who loves quiet mornings. She remembered all the times she had dismissed him. All the times she had felt embarrassed by his softness. All the times she had wished he was stronger, never knowing that he was stronger than anyone she had ever met. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be. Danny reached out and took her hand. His touch was gentle, exactly as it had always been. You saw what you wanted to see, and I showed you what I wanted to show. We were both playing our parts. And now? He smiled, not the thin, dangerous smile from the throne room, but something real, something vulnerable. Now you know the truth, all of it. The question is, what do you want to do with it? Lyrovan looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the gardener and the warrior, the gentle husband and the deadly operative, the man who planted flowers and the man who had killed 30 Crocian warriors in a single night. They were all the same person. They had always been the same person. She had been blind. I want to know you, she said. The real you, not the mask you wear for everyone else. The real me is complicated. I don't care. She squeezed his hand. You are my husband. I should have tried harder to understand you from the beginning. I should have looked past my own assumptions. I judged you by Volanthi standards and missed the warrior standing right in front of me. Danny was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I don't want to be a warrior anymore. I want to be the man who grows flowers. I want to be the man who reads books and makes tea in the morning. I want to be ordinary. You can be, Lyrovan said. But you don't have to hide anymore. Not from me. She stepped closer and pressed her forehead against his, a gesture of intimacy among her people, more meaningful than any kiss. I don't need a monster, she whispered. I don't need a weapon. I just need you, whoever you are, whatever you are. I need my husband. Danny closed his eyes. When he opened them again, some of the sadness had faded, replaced by something that looked almost like hope. Then you have me, he said. All of me. The next morning, Lyrovan woke early. She found Danny already awake, sitting by the window, watching the sunrise paint the crystal towers in shades of gold and rose. You're awake early, she said, echoing words she had spoken 100 times before. I couldn't sleep, he replied. She walked to stand beside him, and this time, she did not tower over him like a protector looking down at something weak. She stood beside him as an equal. As a partner, will you teach me? She asked. Teach you what? To grow flowers. You've been doing it alone for 2 years. I think it's time I learned. Danny looked at her with surprise. Then he smiled, the warm, genuine smile she was only now learning to appreciate. I would like that, he said. They walked together to the conservatory as the three suns rose higher in the sky. And there, among the plants from 100 different worlds, the warrior princess and her human husband knelt in the dirt together and planted seeds. Outside, the galaxy continued to turn. The Crocian Dominion licked its wounds and planned revenge. Political enemies gathered in shadows. New threats emerged from the darkness between stars. But in the conservatory of Sareth Prime, there was only peace. Only dirt and sunlight, and the quiet joy of growing things. Lyrovan looked at Daniad. The gentle curve of his smile, at the careful way he handled each seed, and realized that she had finally found what she had been searching for all along. Not a powerful ally, not a political advantage, not a warrior to stand beside her in battle, just a man. A quiet, complicated, extraordinary man who had chosen to be ordinary. And that, she decided, was more than enough.